Welcome to Baby Boomer Tales. My name's Jim. I'm glad to have you ride along today. The 1980s was the decade I moved from Colorado to Kansas. I have now spent almost half of my life here. It's amazing how fast time goes. So I have this idea, let's spend a little time visiting the 1980s. We'll just go there and look back a little. How's that sound? The year 1980, February 22nd, the U.S. hockey team defeats the Soviet Union in the semifinals at the Lake Placid Olympics. Do you believe in miracles? They went on to win the gold medal that year, and an amazing thing. Back then, you had to be a true amateur to participate in the Olympics. And the Soviet Union, those guys did that for a living. And we beat the mighty USSR. USA, USA. Remember that? March 5th, Jay Silverheels dies. Remember Tonto? Lone Ranger would be nowhere without Tonto. That is a fact. March 31st, Jesse Owens dies. Perhaps the greatest athlete the Summer Olympics ever had. May 18th, Mount St. Helens erupts. Killed 50 people, messed up the atmosphere, was an amazing volcano eruption for the United States. We were driving back from Idaho at the time, and our friends lived up there in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And by the time we got home, we had heard the news and we called them and they said that the ash falling was like a major snowstorm, falling so hard and so thick. May 22nd, Pac-Man was released in Japan. Later in October, it was released in the USA. Remember Pac-Man? Those little guys eating up other little dots? Don't get caught by those ghosts. Isn't that right? I remember one time we were driving to see my grandparents. My grandfather was basically on his deathbed, and we stopped halfway and had to stretch and get out of the car, and we found a Pac-Man game that was back, just in a hotel lobby or something, and we played it for a roll of quarters worth and then went on our way. November 7th, 1980, Steve McQueen dies. November 21st, a record 350 million people turned out to see who shot JR. Remember that? Dallas. December 8th, John Lennon was assassinated in New York City. 1981, January 20th, Iran releases 52 U.S. hostages as the Iran hostage crisis ends. March 3rd, an unsuccessful assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan happened. Reagan was shot, and so was James Baker. Baker was injured severely. August 12th, IBM releases their first personal computer. August 19th, Sandra Day O'Connor becomes the first female Supreme Court Justice. July 29th, Prince Charles weds Diana Spencer. I believe my wife stayed up and watched that on TV. In England, during the day it's night here, so I think I went to bed. 1982, June 11th, E.T. opens in theaters. E.T. Call Home, E.T. Phone Home. I think it's E.T. Phone Home. Remember that? That guy was one ugly dude, and we all loved him. September 15th, the first edition of USA Today was published. Now it's hard to find a newspaper. I don't even look for them anymore. I wouldn't know what to do with one if I found one. November 13th, the Vietnam War Memorial is established in Washington, D.C. as a national memorial. October 1st, Disney World opens Epcot Center. 1983, January 1st. The Internet is born. I wouldn't even be here talking with you right now if the internet hadn't been discovered or created or born. It's an amazing thing, an amazing thing. There's so much good in it and yet so much darkness in it. Beware, but listen to Baby Boomer Tales anyway on the internet. February 28th, the TV show MASH aired their last episode. November 2nd, President Reagan signs legislation making Martin Luther King's birthday a federal holiday. 1984, October 31st, India's Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was shot and killed by two of her bodyguards. 1985, April 23rd. Coke introduces New Coke. It was a monumental failure, I guess. I did an episode about soda pop one time and talked about this. I always thought New Coke kind of tasted like Pepsi. And Pepsi wasn't bad, but if I wanted something that tasted like Pepsi, I'd buy a Pepsi. It was nothing like Coke. And the people responded, and they had to listen to the people, or Coca-Cola would be broke right now. Remember New Coke? What? Like the old Coke wasn't good enough. I don't know. October 18th. The Nintendo Entertainment System debuts in the U.S. We had one of those. We got it for our girls. I remember they gave you a couple games, and one of them was called Duck Hunt. And they gave you little guns. You could shoot the ducks that flew up. The other game that they included was Super Mario Brothers. Long live Super Mario Brothers! 1986, January 28th. The Space Shuttle Challenger explodes and kills all aboard. Remember that time? That's one of those things that you remember where you were when it happened. That, Kennedy's assassination, 9/11. Those three things in my life that I can just name off the top of my head. April 26. Ukraine city of Chernobyl, their nuclear power plant melted down. 1987, June 12th. While in West Berlin, President Reagan challenges Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. 1988, December 21st. Pan Am Flight 103 explodes over Lockerbie, Scotland, killing all 259 people. It was a terrorist bombing. 1989, March 24th. The Exxon Valdez oil tanker runs aground in Alaska's Prince William Sound. And our last item, in the decade of the 80s, November 9th, the Berlin Wall falls. 1980 was an amazing decade. We really didn't know how to deal with terrorism at that time. It was relatively new. There were a bunch of assassinations all over the world, which isn't really a new thing, but it seemed to happen to some key people. The internet and video games were making a huge splash that really changed our whole fabric of our society. And our space race really had a huge setback by that Challenger exploding. In 1980, my second child was born. My first child had been born a couple months before the decade of the 80s started. And all of a sudden we had two children. We bought our first house in the 1980s. I started a job that turned into kind of a career in the 1980s. That was working for Jay at the Trading Post, and it started my life of retail. Now, when you say I work retail, please don't think that everybody that works in retail are some kind of poor man or woman that's working at Walmart. Not that there's anything wrong with working at Walmart. Before the internet and before late night television infomercials, the only way you could buy something is go down to somebody's shop or store and purchase it. 1980s is when we moved to Kansas, like I said. The 1980s is when I had the most stressful situations I ever had in my life. It's also the decade where I sort of reinvented myself, for lack of a better word of it. You know, we're never promised that we'll never fall or never fail. And what really counts in this life is how you handle yourself after that happens. And I did get up, and I did brush myself off, and I did stop feeling sorry for myself, and I did carry on. Now, I had a couple more opportunities in my life to be knocked down and to get back up, and that's okay. Looking back, that's okay. Never blame somebody else for something that happens to you, even if it was orchestrated. Because if you do that, all you're doing is beating yourself up with bitterness and unforgiveness, and you'll never have a chance to move forward and smile on the inside. So be quick to forgive and quick to overcome. And I don't care when you get knocked down, if you get knocked out, you'll come to and you get yourself up. I can't stress it enough. I have seen too many people that when they get knocked down, for whatever reason, they stay down in the mud, down in the pit of unforgiveness and feel sorry for themselves. And I'm not saying that's not real, because I know it is. Been there, done that. But what is even more real is your heart and your spirit. Listen to those. Choose life and not death. What? Death comes to us all. I know that. But when death comes, have it be a victory and not the ultimate defeat. Now for the top songs of the Billboard Hot 100 charts for every year of the 1980s. 1980, Call Me, Blondie. 1981, Betty Davis Eyes, Kim Carnes. 1982, Physical, Olivia Newton-John. 1983, Every Breath You Take, The Police. 1984, When Doves Cry, Prince. 1985, Careless Whisper by Wham. 1986, That's What Friends Are For, Dionne Warwick, Gladys Knight, Elton John, and Stevie Wonder. 1987, Walk Like an Egyptian, The Bangles. 1988, Faith, George Michael. 1989, Look Away by Chicago. While we still have a little time here, let's do the top box office movies of the 1980s. Number 1 in the decade of the 80s, E.T. Number 2, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. Number 3, Star Wars, The Return of the Jedi. Number 4, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Number 5, Batman. Number 6, Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Number 7, Back to the Future. Number 8, Top Gun. Number 9, Rain Man. And the number 10 movie of the 1980s, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. There were some great movies there. I think I was more into the movies than I was into the music of the 80s. Once disco hit in the later 70s, it kind of really changed my outlook on popular music. And I think that stayed with me all these years. Maybe I'm just getting old and crotchety. I don't know. Wherever you are, whatever you do, it's a good life, so be kind to all those that you encounter. And for goodness sakes, be kind to yourself. I'll be back next Wednesday. I can't hardly wait. Peace out.